Christmas week, 1987. While loving parents planned surprises and wrapped gifts, one father was methodically preparing a haunting execution that would wipe out his entire family. Ronald Gene Simmons was a retired Air Force sergeant, born on July 15, 1940, to parents Loretta and William Simmons in Chicago, Illinois. His father, William, passed away on January 31, 1943, after suffering a stroke. Less than a year later, Mother Loretta married U.S. Army Corps civil engineer William D. Griffin. The family found themselves being relocated to Arkansas in 1946 for Griffin's work. On September 15, 1957, Simmons followed similar steps of his stepfather by joining the U.S. Navy and was stationed in Bremerton Naval Base in Washington. It was there he met Bersabe Rebecca, Becky Ulibarri, and the two married in New Mexico on July 9, 1960. In 1963, Simmons decided to change careers and joined the Air Force, where he would be awarded a Bronze Star, the Republic of Vietnam Cross, and the Air Force Ribbon for his remarkable marksmanship. He held the rank of Master Sergeant when he finally retired on November 30, 1979. Ronald and Becky had 7 children total, 3 sons and 4 daughters, whom they raised in Cloudcroft, New Mexico. On April 13, 1981, an investigation by the local Department of Human Services was opened due to an inappropriate relationship he was having with his youngest daughter, then 17-year-old Sheila. Simmons did little to hide the fact that Sheila was his favorite out of the 7 children. She always got the best gifts on her birthday and holidays. He also made sure she was the main focus when he would take pictures of the children together. He even took Sheila on car trips, where it is believed he began molesting and raping her. He was regularly seen giving Sheila, or Ladybug as he called her, passionate and lewd kisses in the mornings as she left for school. It wasn't until Sheila admitted to older brothers Ronald Jr. and William that she was pregnant with their father's baby that something was done. The boys went against Simmons's order to keep this a family secret and told school officials what was going on. Despite the disgust felt by the Simmons's children and wife Becky, Ronald was excited about the news of a baby from his ladybug, but he feared the consequences. The school social worker filed a request to have all of his daughters removed from the home, but by the time the warrant was issued and ready to be served, they discovered the family was gone. Ronald packed the family and fled to Arkansas. Due to their disappearance from New Mexico, incest charges were dropped and he avoided punishment. A love-hate letter addressed to Sheila was later discovered where he stated, "You have destroyed me, and you have destroyed my trust in you. I will see you in hell," referring to her betrayal for telling others about their relationship and incest child. By 1963, the Simmons's family were fully settled in Dover, Arkansas, a tiny town of about 1,300 people. The Pope County home was on an isolated wooded 13 acres of land, known as Mockingbird Hill. The residence consisted of 2 old mobile homes that had been arbitrarily joined together and was completely surrounded by cinder block, barbed wire, and a handmade fence to keep people out. The long, deteriorating red clay driveway had several no trespassing signs that led to their overcrowded yard where piles of building materials, junk cars and trucks and trash was scattered around. The Simmons's home did not have a telephone nor indoor plumbing. Simmons took on work at Woodbine Motor Freight Company as an accounts receivable clerk in the nearby town of Russellville, though he quit after multiple sexual harassment claims were filed against him. He then took on employment at Sinclair Mini Mart, where he stayed until the family's Christmas massacre. The children were put into the local public school, but were never allowed to attend any school events. Though friends did visit sporadically, no one was allowed to spend the night, nor were the Simmons children allowed to spend the night at friends' homes. Ronald never interacted with the visiting children and would just lie on the couch drinking his beer. Liesl Smith, a friend and classmate of Loretta Simmons, stated, "They just tiptoed around him. Whenever he wasn't around, they would act like normal people. When he was around, her mom's main concern was keeping the kids quiet. The look he gave you in his house was, 'When are you leaving?' It was creepy." While the reclusive lifestyle the family lived would normally raise concerns, no one had any real reason to believe there were any issues. The kids were always clean, on time for the bus each day, had a near-perfect attendance at school, no disciplinary record. And while none of the children were straight-A students, none of them were failing either. They all steadily flew below anyone's radar. Although the children were forbidden from attending church, Mother Becky would attend services. Otherwise, she was not allowed to leave the home without Ronald, unless she was doing the family's laundry in town. She was also not allowed to drive, even though she was capable of doing so. Witnesses in later testimonies mentioned regularly seeing Becky with bruises on her face and arms, though no one ever got involved or reported it. Becky was the only member of the family to receive physical discipline from Ronald, though they would sometimes be struck when trying to pull their demented father off of their mother during attacks. Becky Simmons confided in close relatives that she would save enough money to finally divorce Simmons and leave. However, she never got the chance. By the time summer of 1987 rolled around, Simmons's already gloom-ridden mood and behavior had plummeted ever more. His three oldest children, Ronald Jr., Sheila, and William, had all married and moved out of the home into other cities. Of course, losing his beloved Sheila is what truly started to push him over the edge. Sheila had confided in her husband, Dennis McNulty, about the events she endured under her father's hand. Dennis, being understandably protective of his new wife and stepchild Sylvia, warned Ronald if he ever touched his wife again, there would be consequences to face. A furious Ronald had no choice but to watch the one woman he truly loved walk out of his life into the arms of another man, with the child they made together. On December 22, 1987, with vengeance in his heart, Simmons drove to his local Walmart and purchased a .22 caliber handgun. He then returned home with nothing but murder on his mind. While still sleeping in bed, his oldest son, 26-year-old Ronald Gene Jr., who was visiting for the holiday, was the first to feel the wrath of his father. He was bludgeoned and shot to death in only his underwear and socks. A raging Simmons then went to his bedroom, where 46-year-old wife Becky was also sleeping, and shot her dead as well. He later explained in trials that he left the bodies where they lay for quite some time. All the while, his oblivious 3-year-old daughter Barbara was in the home. Perhaps he thought a shot through her tiny body was unnecessary, and decided instead to strangle the toddler, before wrapping her body in a black trash bag. After having a beer, he decided to start moving the bodies out of the home. A few days prior, he had the Simmons' children dig a cesspit in the backyard for a supposed outhouse he planned on building, since the home had no plumbing. Who knew a few days later, it would be their grave. The other Simmons children were still in school, enjoying their last day before Christmas break. He sat back, drank some more beers, and patiently awaited their arrival. When the bus finally arrived, he strangely greeted the children, telling them he had a special Christmas surprise for each of them. However, they needed to be gifted separately. He instructed the children to wait in their rooms until he was ready for them. The first to receive their special gift was his 17-year-old daughter Loretta. Using the .22 caliber handgun he purchased earlier that morning would have alerted the other children of the present they too would be receiving. Instead, he called her outside, where he strangled her and held her head in a rain barrel until she drowned. One by one, he called the children down, 14-year-old Eddie, 11-year-old Marianne, and 8-year-old Rebecca, to experience the same callous fate their older sister just had. They too were thrown in the cesspit. They all had a hand in digging just days earlier. It is unclear what Ronald Simmons did in the days leading up to his other children's expected arrivals to the home. They were all previously invited by their mother, Becky, for an after-Christmas dinner on Saturday, December 26, 1987. Around midday, 22-year-old son William, his wife, 21-year-old Renata, and 1-year-old son William Trey Jr. were the first to arrive. Immediately upon their entrance into the home, right in front of baby Trey, both William and Renata were shot dead. Their bodies were erroneously placed on the dining room table, where they should have been having their family holiday dinner. He then covered their bodies with their own coats and some bedding, before turning his attention to likely screaming baby Trey. In similar fashion to his younger children's exit from the world, Trey was strangled and drowned. However, instead of being placed on the table with his parents, or in the cesspit with his deceased aunts and uncle, Simmons placed his body in plastic wrapping and threw him in the trunk of one of the many abandoned cars in his yard. About an hour later, the last of the Simmons' clan arrived, his now 24-year-old daughter Sheila, 33-year-old son-in-law Dennis, his incestuous daughter/granddaughter 7-year-old Sylvia, and 21-month-old grandson Michael. After some insincere greetings, Sheila and husband Dennis were abruptly shot dead, with both children watching. The next in his line of execution was Sylvia, and then finally baby Michael. Both were strangled to death. Baby Michael's body, just like baby Trey's, was wrapped in plastic and thrown in a separate abandoned car's trunk in the yard. He then made his way back inside the home, lined up the bodies neatly in a row in his living room, and covered the corpses with their coats. Sheila, his ladybug, however, was covered with Becky Simmons' finest tablecloth and displayed in a funeral viewing-like manner. Before going out for a night on the town, Simmons made sure to visit the outside grave and poured kerosene over the bodies in hopes of preventing animals and passers-by from smelling the now rotting flesh. He then drove to Russellville and picked up some Christmas presents he ordered before the holiday, as he was too busy exterminating his family to pick them up on time. He then stayed in town and went to a private club and bar for some drinks. He then returned home, drank more beers, and watched television, ignoring the decaying bodies in his living room. He spent the next 2 nights lounging next to his disintegrating family members, waiting for Monday to arrive so he could complete his apparent kill list. On the morning of Monday, December 28, 1987, Ronald Simmons got into his son Ronald Jr.'s car and drove back to Russellville, where he purchased a second gun from Walmart. He then made his way to his first stop, Peel, Eddy, and Gibbons law firm. The secretary for the firm, 24-year-old Kathleen "Kathy" Kendrick, was a woman he had become infatuated with. Despite his desperate advances with constant candies and flowers, Kathy was not interested. She repeatedly rejected Simmons, as it was inappropriate work behavior, and she was happily married with an almost 3-year-old son. In an effort to seek retribution for this humiliation, he swiftly walked inside the firm, shot her multiple times in the head where she sat at the front desk, and just as swiftly walked out. At about 10:15 a.m., police dispatchers received their first call. Russellville Chief of Police Herb Johnston and Officer Lloyd Hartzell responded to the gruesome scene. Simmons then drove down the street to Taylor Oil Company, looking for previous employer, Russell "Rusty" Taylor, the owner of Sinclair Mini Mart, where he quit just a few days prior. Upon arriving, he found Rusty on the loading dock with truck driver and stranger James "Jim" David Chaffin. He shot at both men, striking Rusty in the chest, while Jim received multiple shots to the head. As Simmons made his way out of the building, another employee came out to investigate what was happening and was also shot at, but he thankfully missed the bystander. Chief of Police Johnston received another call at 10:26 a.m. about this second shooting. He quickly left the law firm to investigate. Rusty survived the attempted assassination, while 33-year-old Chaffin died on the scene. Next stop was the Sinclair Mini Mart, where he shot ex-co-workers Roberta Woolery and David Salyer. Just 13 minutes after the last call, Johnston yet again rushed to the new crime scene alongside another officer, where they found Roberta shot in the jaw and David with a bullet in his head. Both fortunately survived. Simmons's next and last stop in his killing spree was Woodbine Motor Freight Company, where he first met previously slain Kathy Kendrick. The target at this location was one of his former supervisors, Joyce Butts, who interfered with his attempts to sweep Kathy off her feet. He believed she was the reason he was not successful in his inappropriate propositions, and why he needed to quit the job. He shot Joyce in the head and chest at close range. Though she miraculously did not succumb to her injuries, she never fully recovered from the brain injury she sustained as a result of the shooting. It was then Johnston received his fourth and final call, about 10 minutes later at approximately 10:49 a.m. This time, however, Simmons did not leave the scene. Instead, he found one of the secretaries, Vicki Jackson, hiding in the back of the office and ordered her at gunpoint to call the police. Jackson reported that Simmons told her, "I've come to do what I wanted to do. It's all over now. I've gotten everybody who wanted to hurt me." He then tried to give her one of his guns and asked if she was nervous and offered her a cigarette, both of which she refused to take. Just outside was Johnston and about 20 other officers, waiting to take down Simmons. While rifles and shotguns were drawn and pointed toward the entrance of Woodbine Motor Freight Company, Johnston received word that Simmons was done with his Monday massacre and wanted to surrender. Johnston was quoted in later reports, "I called him out and he came out. He had a .22 caliber pistol in his hand, but he wasn't pointing it anywhere. And he asks me, 'What do you want?' I said, 'I want your damn gun.' And he gave it to me." Johnston went on to describe that Simmons was quiet and willingly complied with all of their requests. Russellville police were elated about capturing Simmons and ending the grievous rampage motivated by former co-workers and employers. But they still had no idea about the shocking, gut-churning scene that was waiting for them back at the Simmons home. It was Simmons's reluctance to answer any questions about his family that led police to perform a wellness check at the Mockingbird Hill home. Police broke into the home and were instantly met with the bodies he left laid out in his living room. Though it wasn't until the next day they discovered the bodies in the pit outside and the two toddlers in the car trunks. When Simmons was presented with what they found, he refused to give any comment or explanation. Simmons was then sent to the Arkansas State Hospital in Little Rock, where he was evaluated by psychiatrist Dr. Irving Kuo. Dr. Kuo reported him as sane and capable of standing trial. Speculation as to why Simmons would go on to annihilate every member of his immediate family would run rampant. It was believed that he found his wife Becky's letters about wanting to divorce and leave him. However, prosecuting attorney John Bynum believed he found evidence of the true motive. A safety deposit box owned by Simmons held an undated love-hate note to his daughter Sheila, explaining his disdain for her leaving him. He was truly at a loss as to why she moved away, married Dennis, and had a child with him. The judge ruled the letter as admissible, sending Simmons into a frenzy. He punched prosecutor Bynum in the face and attempted to grab a deputy's handgun from his waist before being dragged out of the courtroom in chains. He was charged and convicted of 16 counts of capital murder, and on March 16, 1989, was sentenced to death by lethal injection, plus 147 years for his mass murder. He waived his right to appeal his death sentence, stating, "I, Ronald Gene Simmond Sr., want it to be known that it is my wish and my desire that absolutely no action by anybody be taken to appeal. It is further respectfully requested that this sentence be carried out expeditiously. To those who oppose the death penalty, in my particular case, anything short of death would be cruel and unusual punishment." Once again, he was evaluated to make sure his refusal of a death penalty appeal was of sound mind. For a second time, it was reported he was completely coherent and competent. After back-and-forth legal proceedings about whether or not the death penalty should be executed, Arkansas Governor and later U.S. President Bill Clinton signed the execution warrant on May 31, 1990. During this time, Simmons refused all visitors, including legal counsel and clergymen. His final meal consisted of filet mignon, 2 raw onions, tomato slices, a banana, 6 rolls, and a 7-Up. Ronald Gene Simmons was put to death by lethal injection on June 25, 1990. This psychotic rampage is now known for being the worst crime involving one family in the history of the United States. So how does a decorated and respected veteran turn into an absolute bloodthirsty tyrant? Did he really not see the issue with being in love with his own daughter? What was it about Sheila that drove him to commit the worst mass murder in Arkansas history? There's still so many unanswered questions. They said he was intelligent and competent, but his thoughts and actions towards his own daughter and family truly say otherwise. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button and share your thoughts, and don't forget to subscribe to the True Crime Collector for more.